Welcome to 8 Unedited Minutes brought to you by the National Speakers Association of Illinois. Crafting a compelling story is both a science and an art form. The components need to be artistically woven together. My guest, Christopher Carter, and I discuss how to do that in this episode. For over 17 years, Christopher Carter was one of the most popular corporate entertainers in the country. He mixed illusions with people reading skills to make it look like he could read people's minds. Now he travels the world teaching others how to use communication and listening skills to improve their lives. We cover topics such as the fundamentals of great storytelling, how to create powerful and meaningful stories to share on the stage, the one thing, above all else, you need to do when crafting compelling stories in the speaking world, and other golden nuggets of advice. You're going to love this show. Thank you for making time to be on 8 Unedited Minutes today, Chris. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
And we're going to be talking about crafting compelling stories and the importance about that in the speaking world. Before we get into the strategies, how did you discover the importance of stories? Why are they important to you? What's your story with that?
All right. Well, my story with stories really emerges from my background. My early career was in the academic world. I worked on a PhD in theater at the University of Michigan, thought I was going to become a theater professor, but decided to take a quick switch from that into being a professional entertainer. I'm a professional mentalist. I make it look like I can read people's minds. In that world, stories really are fundamental. A magic trick or a routine that a mentalist would do is a story. And so much of what people see is fabricated in the context of that story. So I already knew the power of stories. And then when I got into the world of speaking, it came by way of coming out of that world of entertainment. I realized I had amassed a number of communication skills that I thought could effectively be used in the world of business, but I needed to hang those on the hook of quality, compelling stories. And the one thing that really became most fundamental about that is those stories had to be true and they had to be authentic to me. In other words, I couldn't go into the realm of business stories. That I had to have a core of stories that would come out of my own experience, but still related to the business world. And so I think that's probably the most important thing. We have to have unique stories.
How do you define unique?
Well, unique, as I mentioned, two criteria. Number one, true, and number two, coming out of our own personal experience. Now, I'm not saying that all stories have to be this way by any means. In any given business-oriented presentation, we can tell stories about other people from the world of business or other people who've inspired us. But I think that in order to establish your credibility in front of an audience, you need a set of stories about who you are and how you got to be there. So unique in the sense that they're personal and they're true.
Is it personal and professional stories, just to be sure?
Yeah, both actually.
Okay.
Both. I mean, your walk in the world of business, but the first kind of story that you need to tell when you get on stage is who you are and how you got there, why you are there. And without that core of credibility, everything else you talk about isn't going to be worth anything.
Over time, how do you know which stories to keep in your docket, if you will, and which ones to let go?
Well, I think probably most people are going to have different perspectives on this, but for me, one of my criteria for a story is that it has to be innately entertaining on its own outside of the moral or the message that it conveys. I like my stories to have beats where the audience laughs, the energy comes up. But I also, they have a message, a kernel of wisdom that I'm trying to convey. But when I get on stage, there's still enough of an entertainer in me. I want a rhythm, I want a pace. So the ones I keep ultimately are the ones that have that connection between the wisdom that they impart and just the sheer entertainment value of the story themselves.
And when you say personal, how personal do you get? Are you talking about childhood stories or things that happened to you in the professional world that affected you personally as an adult, or maybe both?
I think both are allowable, but the key issue with a story in a keynote speech is that it has to be able to impart some level of business wisdom or explain how you became able to impart this kind of wisdom. So, if you can find something formative from your childhood that does one or both of those things, that's fine. But, I'm not tossing in stories purely for entertainment. So I guess part of my answer to that is yes, both, but both are acceptable. It really has to do with the combination of inherent entertainment value to the story and the wisdom that they convey.
Okay, you've mentioned wisdom a few times. Will you unpack that? What do you consider to be
Sure,
wisdom?
absolutely. I have a story that I use in my program about a clerk at the Department of Motor Vehicles. Her name was Sylvia. Without desperately going into this story, she just gave this incredible amount of customer service. And and that's how I told the story forever. And then working with a coach, he said, but let's dig into this. How did Sylvia come to the point where she was delivering this particular kind and style of customer service? And I began to think about her and her life and what might have motivated her to develop these interpersonal skills that she had in a place like where nobody has high interpersonal skills. And then suddenly she's making me feel incredible. And I realized that at some point she probably felt nervous in reaching out to the customer. I guess I'm going to have to give you some background to it. Uh, well, hot day at the DMV, and she's looking at me, and she notices my watch, and she says, "That is a really nice watch. Can I take a picture of that? Send to my son. He'd like one just like this." And she snaps a picture of my watch. It just makes me feel good. It makes me feel
Mhm.
incredible. And now I go away from this thinking, well, I feel good about the DMV. But about 3 months later, my wife is there. And the same thing, exactly the same thing happens to her. She meets Sylvia. Sylvia sees her watch, takes a picture of this. So I realized that Sylvia has created a presentation here, something that she always does. And so now the story isn't simply about the presentation, her going an extra mile to make people feel good. It's about why she might have done that. And now I have to dig into her motivations or possible motivations because, dealing with surly, disgruntled customers day in and day out must take some kind of psychological or emotional toll. So surely coming up with this had something to do with that. And I'd be willing to bet because I work with a lot of actors initially in my career who were on stage for the first time and they had this incredible sense of stage fright. I bet Sylvia had that same kind of stage fright. Now, I'm interpreting her experience, but I'm trying to dig into her mind and what might have motivated her. And ultimately, what we come up with in the context of the story, when I tell the story, is that it's no longer about just simply delivering an incredible customer service experience. It's about that moment of vulnerability when she decided to take a leap and try to connect with another person. And that moment of vulnerability requires of courage. It requires taking that step to just toss out a little bit of compliment, even though you're unsure about how that person is going to take
Mhm.
it. So, at the advice of my speaker coach, or my story coach for this one, who was Kevin O'Connor, one of our NSA Illinois members, I dug deeper and I come up with a story that ultimately is not about just going the extra mile. It's about overcoming that moment of trepidation and vulnerability
Mhm.
to become something better than what we were before.
We have covered a lot of ground in a short period of time when it comes to crafting stories, whether it's reiterating something you said or maybe something you haven't touched on yet. If you were to tell people when it comes to crafting a story, at least do this one thing, at least this, what would you tell people to do?
At least improvise it on your feet. Don't write it. Improvise it. Get up. Talk your way through it. And then go back and do it again and again and again until it gets refined.
Thank you so much, Chris. And if people want to find you online, where's the best place or places to go?
The best place to go is my website, ChristopherCarter.com. Absolutely the best place to go.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the time, Chris.
Thank you.
And scene.